My preliminary conclusion is there is no middle ground.
Mm.
And historical critical method and isnad analysis are two diametrically opposed ways of looking at early Islam and reports, and I don't find much commonality between them as of yet. Obviously, in small areas, yeah, but overall, two diametrically opposed epistemologies. That having been said, therefore, one will have to navigate the religious side of things if you are a believing Sunni, Hadith believer, in a different epistemology. And when you are arguing in the academic world, you'll have to use a different epistemology. So in some areas, there's good, healthy overlap. In some areas, we'll politely agree to disagree. And in some areas, there.
Because of that extraordinary video, I want to pay tribute to one of the foremost Islamic scholars in the United States and indeed in the whole world, Dr. Yasir Qadhi. I've been an admirer of Dr. Qadhi for many years, and this video validates my admiration. What is he saying in this video? What he's saying essentially is this, that the whole structure of Islam from beginning to end is a castle built on sand. It's a high-rise building with no first floor. Because without the science of hadith, which he has just dismissed in the video you have just seen, Islam itself does not and cannot exist. Now, in the first place, in order to understand that, we have to understand what he means by the science of hadith. And you can see that from this chart. The hadiths, of course, are reports about Muhammad's words and deeds. Ones that are considered authentic are considered normative for Islamic law. And in order to consider a hadith authentic, it has to be classified as such based on its isnad, that is the chain of transmitters who have passed it from the people who first told it at the time of Muhammad until the 9th century when it was finally written down. And so you see from the chart that there are various grades of hadith based on the reputations of the people who passed it on, based on various other considerations that will ultimately get it the grade of sahih or sound, daif, which is weak, or various other grades. And on that basis, it is considered authoritative or not. Now, that's the science, but it's really not a science. The problem is that the texts that are being evaluated in this way are all 200 years removed from the incidents they claim to describe. And in many cases, the chains of transmission, the isnad chains, upon which their claim to authenticity is based, are often even later than the stories themselves. Yet this is the basis for a great deal of Islamic doctrine and practice. Even the 5 daily prayers and the details of what to pray during those 5 daily prayers come from the Hadith, not the Quran. Now, many Muslims nowadays say, no, we just need the Quran alone, because the Quran itself says, light from Allah and a clear book has come to you. That's chapter 5, verse 15. The clear book is supposed to be the Quran itself. But the fact is, only a cursory reading is needed to establish it isn't clear at all. Now, I could give a myriad of examples of this, but just take one. The word zihar in chapter 58, verse 2. That reads this way: those of you who put away your wives, they are not their mothers. No one are their mothers except those who gave them birth. They indeed speak an evil word and a lie. And indeed, Allah is forgiving, merciful. Now, put away in that passage, those of you who put away your wives, is yuzahiruna, which is a word that is assumed in various hadith to be referring to a practice called zihar, which is to say to your wife, you are like my mother, which is essentially to pronounce divorce. But elsewhere in the Quran, the same word, zihar, means aid or help or support. For example, chapter 2, verse 85 says, "Yet it is you who kill each other and expel a party of your people from their homes, supporting one another against them by sin and aggression." Supporting in that passage is tazaharuna, a form of the same word. Chapter 9, verse 4, same thing. "Except for those of the idolaters with whom you have a treaty, and who have not been deficient toward you, nor have supported anyone against you." Support in that passage is yuzahiru. So to use the Quran's own common meaning of the word, we would understand chapter 58, verse 2 as saying, "Those of you who supported your wives, they're not your mothers," which of course would not make any sense. So the hadith is needed in order to make the Quran passage make any sense at all. Other examples of this are the story of the disobedient wives in the Quran chapter 66 and of Zayd and his wife in chapter 33. The hadiths in both of those cases flesh out the elliptical and elusive text of the Quran and make it understandable. And yet Yasir Qadhi is saying that all this is baseless and has no historical value, which is exactly what I've been pointing out for years. The material from 200 years later is the material on which so much of Islamic doctrine and practice is based, and yet that material has undergone a great deal of legendary elaboration, so much so that whatever really happened or whatever was really said cannot be discerned. But it's absolutely clear that there has been legendary elaboration, as there are so many stories that have variations and different forms, different versions, and so on. Now, this means that non-Muslims who insist that the Hadith literature, which dates from 200 years after Muhammad is supposed to have lived and has so many signs of legendary elaboration, non-Muslims who claim that all that is reliable are now in the very strange position of being more of a believer than one of the leading Islamic clerics and scholars in the US, Yasir Qadhi. Now, Qadhi, of course, is still a Muslim. He's still a believer, very much so. But he acknowledges here that he understands that his faith is blind. It has no intellectual or historical foundations. He says this in a clarifying post on X after this video came out. And in that he says, "Just to be clear, I'm obviously being descriptive in that lecture. What I said is factually correct. The Western Academy has a different paradigm than the believing Sunni Muslim when it comes to Hadith. I explicitly said when I preach, I will quote Sahih al-Bukhari as an evidence of what the Prophet said. But I understand when I write papers or present in the Academy, that won't be taken as definitive evidence. It appears your clip is giving the impression I endorse the HCM paradigm." That's the historical critical method. "But as I explained, I live in both worlds and must navigate that in my life as I preach and as I present papers." So he does not accept the historical critical paradigm. In other words, he's not saying that he doesn't believe that Muhammad was real. He's just admitting that to believe that Muhammad is real has no historical basis. There's no reason for it other than he wants to be a Muslim. He wants to believe in all this. And so even though he knows it has no historical foundation, he's going to keep on believing it. He's going to keep on pretending that these passages about Muhammad, these stories about Muhammad in the Hadith, these quotations of Muhammad's words and words, they all have a historical foundation when they don't really, and he knows it. And so I really want to thank Yasir Qadhi in this case from the bottom of my heart. He has now validated the work that I've done, exposing the lack of historical foundation of the Islamic texts and teachings in my books, Did Muhammad Exist? And Muhammad, A Critical Biography. For more details about this issue, you can consult those books and see exactly why Dr. Yasir Qadhi has now essentially admitted that Muhammad, the prophet of Islam as described in the Hadith, did not exist. Thank you.